We are going to discuss a little more about ratios on the coordinate plane today. Ratios can be represented with tables, graphs, equations on the coordinate plane, and with verbal descriptions. So that's what's going in that blank, verbal descriptions. Okay. Here on this first graph, we're going to use the graph below to complete the missing information in the table, in the ratio table. Then we're going to write a verbal description and an equation that represents the information. So let's look here. First of all, we're going to look at these that are plotted. We see that we have 1 and what looks like 50, but I don't want to just automatically assume it's 50. So I'm going to go over here to my table. And so my first blank is going to have 1 to represent the hour. And I'm going to think, how do I get from 4 to 1? Well, I know that I divided by 4. And if I do that there, I have to do it here as well. Divide by 4. And 200 divided by 4 is 50. So it actually is going to be 50. Now let's look at the process. Remember, the process is telling me what's happening across. Also remember that this is our x-axis. Oh, that's ugly. This is our x-axis and this is our y. Okay, let's look at the process. To go from 1 to 50, I am multiplying the hour, which is 1, times 50. Okay, now we're moving to our next plotted point, which is right here, which is 2. So we're going to put 2, and if I keep looking, I notice that they're all the way down to 9. So 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And my process every time is going to be taking the hour, multiplying by 50. The hour times 50. The hour times 50. And continuing on until I get to 9 times 50. If I keep on going, I will end up with finding my miles, which we know actually does match up to the graph, but it does not always. So 2 times 50 is 100. 3 times 50 is 150. We already have 4 times 50. 5 times 50 is 250. 6 times 50 is 300. 7 times 50 is 350. 8 times 50 is 400. And 9 times 50 is 450. So now let's move down and let's do a verbal description. Well, to describe this graph, we see that we have time. So in 1 hour, something is traveling 50 miles. And I would just think of a car. So I would say a car travels 50 miles in 1 hour. Okay? You're going to normally, when you are describing your ratio, you're going to use the simplified version of your ratio. And then for an equation, remember, we have the hours. We look at the process. It is the hours times 50, which gives us the miles. And another way that we can write that is miles equals 50h. Let's move on down and answer these questions. What is the ratio of the number of hours to the number of miles? That's one asking you the simplified ratio. The number of hours was 1 to the number of miles is 50. So how many hours will it take to travel 300 miles? Well, we can look on our chart here or on our table, and I see right here 300 miles, so it would take 6 hours. So our answer here is 6 hours. If this is continued with the same ratio, then how many miles would be traveled in 15 hours? Now, there's a couple of ways that you can do this. You could set up a proportion, or you could look on your table. To set up a proportion, you would say, okay, I'm going to do hours over miles. So that's 1 hour, 50 miles, and I want to know 15 hours equals how many miles? Then I do my cross multiplying. 1 times m is m. And then I say 50 times 15. Okay, and 50 times 15 is 750. I could also look up here and I could say, okay, 15 miles. Well, I'm going to look right here at this part of my table. And I'm going to say, okay, well, I know 5 can go to 15 by multiplying by 3. So 250 times 3 gives me 750 miles. Same way, just whichever is easiest for you to think about. What does the ordered pair 9, 450 represent in this situation? So let's go back and look. Right here, we have 9 and 450. This 9 represents how many hours, and the 450 represents the number of miles. So this represents that in 9 hours, they traveled 450 miles. So in 9 hours, we'll say the car traveled 450 miles. We are learning how to put this information into word form. All right, let's go on to the back. We're on page 31. We are going to practice. Now this time they did not put anything on the graph. They just gave us the information down here, the verbal description. The verbal description says, a bike rider graphs his training for the week. He trains by riding 5 miles each day. I prefer making the table first. So 5 miles each day. Well, so that means at day one, he trained for 5 miles. And that means my process is taking the day, multiplying by 5. And then we can move on to day 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then each one of these is the same process. We're taking the day multiplied by 5. So we're going to write that all out in our process area. And then we are going to write the actual miles. So 2 times 5 is 10. 3 times 5 is 15. 4 times 5 is 20. 5 times 5 is 25. 6 times 5 is 30. And 7 times 5 is 35. Now I can take this information and plot it, but before I do, I need to remind myself that this is my x-axis and this is my y-axis. So my first ordered pair is 1, 5. So I'm going to go to 1, 5 and put my dot. Then I'm going to say 2 to 10, my dot, 3 to 15, 4 to 20, 5 to 25, 6 to 30, 7 to 35. And I could actually follow the pattern and keep on going, but I'm going to stop right there. Now I want to write an equation. So I'm going to say, remember here in my process, it shows me I take the number of days times 5, and that gives me the number of miles. Or I could write it as the number of miles equals 5 times d. And that's the way I can write it. Okay, we are going to quickly look at this one. I'm not going to worry about the verbal description or the equation right now, but I want you to look. If you notice, they've skipped a little bit. So we don't have this one, or this one, but that's okay. We don't need them. So let's look. Remember, that does not quite look like it is at the 10. So let's see. Let's go over here and look. 5 divided by what gives me 1? Well, divided by 5. So 60 divided by 5 gives me 12. Now I can figure out my process. My process is going to be the hours times 12. So this, I look at my hours, which is 3 times 12, 4 times 12, 5 times 12, and 8 times 12. Okay? Now I can go ahead and multiply. I can say, okay, 3 times 12 is 36. 4 times 12 is 48. And 8 times 12 is 96. And to check my work, I can go and look. I can say, okay, 8, and this looks about at 96. 5, this is at 60, yeah. Then I can say 4 should be about 48, yes, and 3 at about 36. So this does look right. You are going to be moving on to Khan Academy, practicing ratios on the coordinate plane.